In December 1944, when many believed the war in Europe was nearly over, Adolf Hitler prepared one last desperate gamble that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies had already liberated France and were pushing toward Germany, and it seemed the Nazi war machine was collapsing. But Hitler hoped that a surprise attack could turn the tide. His plan was ambitious: strike through the Ardennes forest, break the American lines, capture the important port of Antwerp, and split the Allied forces in two. If it worked, he believed he could force the Western Allies to negotiate and buy Germany more time. The Ardennes seemed an unlikely place for such a massive operation. Its forests were thick, the terrain was rough, and the Allies assumed no large attack could come from there. Because of that, the region was thinly defended, and Hitler counted on the element of surprise. Before dawn on December 16, 1944, the quiet of the snow-covered woods was shattered as more than 200,000 German troops, supported by tanks and heavy artillery, launched a sudden offensive. Fog and winter storms kept Allied aircraft on the ground, leaving American forces without their usual air support. The attack came as a shock. Many U.S. soldiers were young and inexperienced. Some had never seen combat, and they were suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer size of the German advance. The front line bent backward under the pressure, and on the maps this bulging curve gave the battle its famous name. Amid the chaos, pockets of resistance slowed the German advance. One of the most remembered stands took place in the town of Bastogne, Belgium, where the 101st Airborne Division and other units became completely surrounded. The situation was grim. Supplies were running out, the weather was brutally cold, and many soldiers had little more than thin jackets to face the freezing winter. Yet their spirit remained unbroken. When the Germans demanded their surrender, the American commander, General Anthony McAuliffe, famously responded with just one word: nuts. That defiance boosted morale, and the soldiers dug in, holding their ground under impossible conditions. Meanwhile, General George Patton's Third Army maneuvered rapidly across icy roads, and just before Christmas, his troops broke through to relieve Bastogne, turning the tide of the battle. But the fight was not only about strategy, it was also a struggle for survival. Soldiers endured frostbite, hunger, and exhaustion as they huddled in frozen foxholes. The bitter cold claimed nearly as many victims as the fighting itself. Belgian civilians, caught in the middle, suffered terribly as their villages were shelled and burned. Families hid in cellars as artillery thundered overhead, and countless innocent lives were lost. The battle showed not only the clash of armies, but also the deep human cost of war. By the end of December, the skies cleared, and Allied aircraft returned in force, striking German tanks, supply lines, and convoys. The German advance slowed and then collapsed as their fuel and resources ran out. On January 25, 1945, the Bulge was gone, and the Allies had regained the ground they had lost. It had been the largest battle fought by the United States Army during the war, involving over 600,000 American troops. The cost was staggering: around 90,000 Allied casualties and nearly 100,000 German losses. For Germany, it was a devastating blow. The offensive had drained their last reserves of men and equipment, leaving them unable to launch another large attack. In the end, Hitler's gamble failed. The Allies soon pressed deeper into Germany, and only months later, the war in Europe came to an end. Yet the memory of the Battle of the Bulge lived on. For those who fought in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, it was not just another chapter of war, but an unforgettable test of courage, endurance, and sacrifice. In the harshest of winters, against overwhelming odds, ordinary soldiers proved their extraordinary strength, and their story continues to remind us of resilience in the darkest of times.